up, we want to start shooting stuff. So we've quite a bit done with our player. We're going to do one more script. Let's go C# script, and it'll be called player attack. So we know we have projectiles created for our player. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go and set that up. So here's my projectiles, and they're probably a little big, given the size of my UFO. So we have to scale these down as well. I'm going to drag, select all my frames, and then oh no, that's okay. Drag them all in, and I'll call it projectile. Okay. Now I'm going to change its name. And one thing I want to do is I want to create a custom tag for this. So I'm going to say add tag. And I'm going to call it player projectile. This would be a projectile that would be shot by the player. So maybe I'll actually make sure the name matches on. Now we do want to have a few bits and pieces, a few components on this. First up, we do want a circle collider. One thing we're going to do is we're going to mark it as a trigger. We'll mark it as a trigger. Okay. We're then going to add in a rigid body. So remember, triggers work the exact same as colliders, except objects pass through each other. Now when it comes into our rigid body, I'm going to set my gravity scale to be 0, and I'm also going to change my mass to be 0.1. It is smaller, so I don't like to be throwing objects around or anything. So if I increase the mass and I hit something, even though it is marked as a trigger, it'll pass through. But if you turn that off, so if you have each triggers unchecked and you increase the mass to be massive, and it hits an object, push that object around, and you can get some kind of crazy results from using it. So I actually want to save this guy. Okay, so my player projectile, I'm going to drag it into my prefabs folder down here, and now that is saved and ready for use later on. And I can delete it out of the level. And we're actually going to do that to our player then as well, just in case we lose anything. So I got my player and I got my projectile. So I'm going to go back to my player attack script, and we're going to get ready. So I'm going to get rid of my comments here. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be shooting a projectile. So that object that we just created, we want to shoot one of those. So we know it has a rigid body, so we might be able to use that to actually set it off moving. First things first though, we need a reference to that actual prefab that we just created. So way back at the beginning, I said everything that's placed on a level in Unity is a game object. So that projectile that we just turned into a prefab is a game object. So if I come back into Unity, I'm just let my player and my prefab down here, and I'm going to see that I did not put on the actual player attack script. So I'm going to come back in here and go player attack, and I can see my projectile. And I just want a game object, so I can drag in that projectile. So that's now assigned to it. And I've done it in the prefab down here, not in the level. So note that if you make a load of changes up here, you can actually apply that to what's already been saved. So you can say overrides, and I haven't changed anything, but there'll be like an apply overrides button that you can pick, and it'll update your prefab for you. So player attack, got a projectile, got a reference to this game object here. What we want to do is actually create instances of these game objects, this projectile, every time the mouse is clicked. Now we've seen the input manager before. There's one here called fire. I can see it's left control or mouse 0, which is my left mouse. And you can see the other ones in here. Left alt mouse 1, left shift mouse 2. So we're going to go for fire 1. So the left click on our mouse. So it's going to be very, very similar to what we did before. So in here, I need to be checking continuously. This isn't going to be a 1 or a 0 thing. I need to go, hey, have they clicked on the mouse? And we're going to be able to shoot some stuff here. So to ask a question, look, we have a condition here. If the left mouse button has been pressed, shoot a projectile. And you'll be happy to know the syntax is pretty much as I just said it. If, open round bracket, the mouse left button, so if input dot get button down, this actually returns a boolean, a true or false. He wants the name of the button, and we're just going to say fire 1. And I'm going to explain a little bit what's going on here. So this is an if statement. This is a condition. So inside this, we're going to make a decision that can either be true or false. So whatever condition you're putting in here must return a value of true or false back in order for this statement to work. So if I hover over my get button down, it actually returns a bool. So it goes to check to see if the fire button was down, and if it was, it'll return true. If it wasn't, it returns false. Now if it was true, it's going to come in and it's going to execute whatever is inside these curly braces. So if that is true, come inside and execute it. Just to note that if it wasn't true, we have another bit we can put in here called else, and we'll see a little bit later on. So if something's true, we can come in here, we can execute it. Otherwise, if something's false, go in here and do this instead. So we're going to see that a little bit later on. So we're going to fire something here. Now I'm going to deliberately take out the down bit here just so we get a more interesting first effect. So this will be, as long as they have the button held, it'll start returning true. So we're going to have like a machine gun style shooting here. So if the left mouse button is down, I want to create an instance of projectile. I want to make a copy of it and I want to spawn it into the game somewhere. Unity does this through what's known as instantiate. And this is a method that has loads of different varieties of parameters that can be passed in. So the first one, it wants to know, well, who are you making a copy of? Well, that's my projectile guide that I have off the top. It's also going to know where you want to spawn this object and at what rotation do you want to give that object in as well. And there's loads of different stuff here. We can attach objects to other objects, but we're going to just put in our position here, transform that position, and then it wants a rotation. And we're just going to say quaternion.identity, so no rotation on the X, Y, or Z axis. So now every time I click on the left button or hold the left button, it should start creating a projectile. So let's jump back in and see what we're getting. And we can see if I hold my left mouse button down, it's going to add in loads of them. But it's putting them all in on top of me. Okay. So get button down. Good stuff. See how that has now worked out for us. I should have to click each time. Perfect. Now we notice one thing, they are always on top of my ship. So this, I suppose, is a decision. I can want to hide the fact that they're spawning in just like that. So what I can do is, way back ages ago, I talked about in my sprite renderer, we had a guy here called order and layer. So by default, everything's at 0. So if I want something to be on top of another object, its order and layer would have to be higher than that object. So I can either go to the projectile here and make it lower than 0, or I can just go to my player ship and make its order and layer 1. So make it above it. So now we can see that they've been hidden underneath it. And remember, they do have a collider on it. And also, they have a rigid body then as well. But remember, because it's set as a trigger, it doesn't collide at me. So I'm not pushing these around or any of that kind of stuff. If you actually want to test that out, you get some weird behaviors here. If I say it is not a trigger, and I click on play, you usually try and separate these objects. Oh, it's going to freak out a little bit. Yeah, we can see them all kind of getting stacked up. And because I'm so much heavier, my mass is whatever 10 times, I can push them around. And it's 0 gravity as well. So they'll just keep on moving as they're supposed to. So you can come up with interesting stuff here, debris or something like that that your player ship can pass through. We might come back and reuse this a little bit later. So put my trigger back on, because these are projectiles. I don't want them to hit me or anything. So how about we look at maybe shooting these then? So I'm able to create an instance of it here. Okay, this instance guy actually returns back a game object to me. And I could say projectile instance. Okay, we've instantiated a projectile, it's put it into the level, and now it's returned back the guy that's in the level. Because remember, this guy here is just like a blueprint, a prefab, a template. We are instantiating it in our line of code, and then Unity adds that into the scene for us dynamically while the game is running. So now we have access to this guy, and this is where the code, like, we can make loads of different decisions here, how we can clear this up. But basically what I'm going to do is, when I create one of these guys, I want to grab the rigid body out of that object, and I want to tell it what direction I want it to move in. So it's one thing that actually isn't perfectly listed here, but it is actually shown. There's a velocity guy. This is how quickly it's going to be moving. So we're directly going to modify a velocity. So it's going to send this guy flying off. So when we did this before in our player movement, I used get component to get a component of the current game object that we're attached to. But I can do the exact same thing to another game object. So if I say projectile inst.get component, and I say, hey, I want a rigid body 2D, it'll go in and it'll try and find it. Now, I am skipping over bits here, like for instance, it might not be in there. So if it doesn't find it, it returns back a null value, and you'll get an error while the game is running. And there's ways we can kind of check ahead of time to see if something's there without doing it. But I know it's going to work for us here, so we're just kind of go ahead with it. So there it is. I've got the projectile that we just created after we clicked. I've now got the rigid body of that projectile, that one individual one. I can now start to move it around. So maybe if I create a public variable up here. Now this is, this will be a debatable thing here. Where do I put projectile speed? Maybe I should put that in the individual projectile as opposed to putting it in this player attack. And it completely depends how you want to set it up. I'm trying to reduce the amount of code we're doing here. So I could have a script, well, I will have a script on the projectile, I suppose, but in there I could store how to actually move and what direction is to go and that kind of stuff. But for a simple, I just want to shoot you in one direction. There's no fancy moving around the place or anything. I'm just going to directly set its velocity or direction from here. So what do we want to do? I can say body dot velocity is equals to projectile speed multiplied by what direction do you want to move in? Well, it's a vector 2 because it's going to be like an x and a y. So you need to figure out this bit. Okay. So if I put in 1 here in the y-axis, that's a positive y. So it's going to multiply 10 by 1. That's in here, and it's going to set my velocity to that. So my velocity after I create this bullet will be 0 on the x-axis and 10 on the y-axis. So this bullet is going to start moving up the screen as soon as I click. And we can see it moving off. And of course it'll do its collision stuff. Oh no, sorry, I keep forgetting it's a trigger. So that's great if your game is taking place all in one direction. Obviously you can come in and you can change it to be a -1 and a 0.5. And we can see that it's kind of shooting off there. Okay. And because it's a floating point value in here, I have to put in an F after then as well to signify that. So it's fine up here because I have no decimal point in it. But you will have to provide an F. It went red there for a second. So we need to get a direction out of here then as well. So with the choice, we can get this from our player, or we can work out a direction between the mouse, for instance, and the player. And we can do that twice. But what we're going to do here is we're actually just going to get the position from my, I should say the direction from my player. So I say transform.up. This is the upwards direction or the forward direction in two-dimensional games. So just to know, in a 3D game, if I want to know the forward direction of an object, I would go transform.forward. But because this is 2D and we're not using the z-axis, it's going to be transform.up. Oh, I left that running. So we can see, oh, it's because it's rotating. Yeah, okay. I forgot that I was rotating it. We can see as we rotate, it'll now shoot off in those directions. So it's taking that up. So that guy, it actually won't be useful at all to us, but we do get to see that we're now able to kind of shoot this stuff. Okay, so we're going to leave it there. We're going to come back and we're going to move it with our mouse, and then we're going to start to clean up these bullets.